We're taught that love is about closeness, that if you care deeply enough, you lean in, explain more, call again, text again, clarify what you meant, prove your good intentions, try harder. But what if I told you that the very act of trying, when it stems from fear rather than calm, can push a man further away? Because sometimes silence doesn't signal apathy, it reveals self-respect. And sometimes ignoring isn't cruelty, it's clarity. In relationships, over-functioning becomes a kind of emotional noise. The more one partner chases, the more the other retreats. This is the dance of anxious pursuit and avoidant withdrawal, a cycle I've seen ruin thousands of once loving couples. We ignore or we refuse to ignore, both driven not by strategy, but by anxiety. And behind that anxiety is often this internal conflict. Do I stay true to myself, or do I shapeshift just to be loved? That's the cost of over-explaining, of emotional performing. You lose sight of yourself while trying not to lose someone else. So I ask you, who are you when you stop performing? This is where the art and the darker psychology of ignoring come in, not as manipulation, but as emotional boundary setting. The contrast is sharp: peace versus panic, self-possession versus self-abandonment. And here's what I want you to remember. Sometimes the most powerful sound in love is the silence that says, I will not chase what won't meet me halfway. When we talk about ignoring a man, especially in the context of intimate relationships, we're not endorsing manipulation or game playing. We're talking about an emotionally intelligent withdrawal, a pause, a conscious detachment that protects your nervous system, your dignity, and your truth. And yet even the phrase ignoring a man stirs discomfort. Why? Because you've been conditioned to equate presence with love, to believe that if you care, you stay available. But what happens when your availability is met with stonewalling, criticism, defensiveness, or worse, indifference? Let's start with this. When someone stops responding and you start over-explaining, over-apologizing, over-pursuing, is emotional flooding. Flooding is when your nervous system becomes overwhelmed by conflict or disconnection. Your body kicks into fight, flight, or freeze. And for many people, especially those with anxious attachment, that means fight for closeness. You text, you talk, you beg for repair. But the problem is the more flooded you are, the more dysregulated your responses become. You say things you don't mean. You abandon your boundaries just to not be abandoned. And often when that's when a partner, especially an emotionally avoidant one, withdraws even further. Here's your first aha moment. The more you chase clarity from someone who's shutting down, the more invisible you become. Why? Because when a man isn't emotionally available, your bids for connection, the small moments where you try to re-engage, like, can we talk? Or did you see what I sent? Aren't met. In the Gottman framework, these are called bids. Healthy couples turn toward these bids. Unhealthy ones ignore or reject them. And repeated rejection of bids is one of the earliest predictors of emotional disconnection. So what do you do when your bids are repeatedly dismissed? You don't escalate them. You don't beg louder. You self-soothe. Self-soothing isn't a spiritual platitude. It's a psychological lifeline. It means removing yourself from the emotional battlefield, grounding your body, breathing into your rib cage, and getting quiet enough to hear your own voice again. Ignoring someone in this context isn't cold. It's regulatory. It's a pause that says, my nervous system can't afford to play this losing game right now. Here's your second aha. Sometimes silence is not punishment, it's repair. Not for them, for you. Now, let's explore the dynamic through the Gottman concept of love maps, our internal GPS for understanding a partner's world, their values, fears, dreams, stressors. But here's the truth. Few want to admit, sometimes you've built a love map for someone who hasn't bothered to sketch even a corner of yours. You're walking through their emotional terrain blindfolded, trying to anticipate needs, while yours are constantly misread or neglected. This is where the internal reframe begins. You may have told yourself, if I just love him better, he'll open up. The healing reframe, I can love him without abandoning myself. And when I start abandoning myself, it's time to come home. Now let's look at the most corrosive forces in relationships, what I call the four horsemen: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. If your connection has devolved into these patterns, especially stonewalling, the silent treatment, the shutting down, then sometimes the most loving act you can offer yourself is to mirror that silence, not in retaliation, but in recovery, behavior, insight, healing. Behavior, you stop texting, you go quiet. Insight, not because you're playing a game, but because the connection has become unsafe for your nervous system. Healing, you realize silence can restore clarity. Your attention is sacred. Your peace is a boundary. I'm not here to tell you that detachment is the solution to every relational breakdown, but I am here to tell you this. The dark psychology of ignoring isn't about cruelty. It's about what happens when survival mode meets emotional erosion. And the art of ignoring, the conscious, centered, boundary-ignoring kind, is not detachment from love. It's detachment from harm. Not everything unspoken is unresolved. Not every silence is a threat. Sometimes it's a beginning of dignity, of healing, of remembering yourself. There was a woman, we'll call her Mariah, who loved deeply, intuitively, generously, the kind of woman who remembered small details like how he took his coffee, the stress behind his sighs, the song he hummed when he was quietly hopeful. And when she loved, she gave. Words, care, softness. She believed that explaining her feelings would create closeness, that transparency meant connection. But over time, something in the relationship shifted, not with a slam, but a slow closing of emotional doors. Messages got shorter. Phone calls became rare. He'd glance at his phone when she was speaking. She started feeling like an interruption in her own relationship. Still, she tried harder. She sent long texts to clear the air. She asked questions that never got answered. She reread their old messages, trying to decode the turning point. She told herself, if I can just help him understand how much I care, he'll come back, he'll soften. But every attempt at closeness was met with cool detachment, a shrug, a delay, silence. One night, she sat in her car outside his apartment, not because he'd asked her to come, but because she didn't know what else to do. She stared at her phone, thumb hovering over a drafted message. Hey, I'm outside. Can we talk? She sat with it. Her heart thudded. And then she didn't send it. She stared at the blinking cursor, then slowly deleted the entire message. One line at a time. Backspace, backspace. And in that quiet space, with the blue glow of the screen on her face, something whispered inside her. You don't have to audition for love. She didn't cry, not then. Just sat in the soft, unexpected stillness. She started the engine, turned the car around, and drove home. That night, she didn't reach out. The silence wasn't revenge. It wasn't manipulation. It was oxygen. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without checking her phone. In the days that followed, she noticed new things. The way her chest used to tighten when his name appeared on her screen, and how now she exhaled instead. The way she used to keep her ringer on just in case he texted, and how now her phone sat in another room, forgotten. Here's what she realized, the mirror moment. I was explaining myself to someone who'd stopped listening, but worse, I stopped listening to me. She hadn't stopped loving, she had just stopped begging. Because the truth was never that he needed more explanation. It was that she needed more reflection. And what she saw when she finally looked inward was not a woman too much, but a woman who had given too much without return. And that's when it shifted, not because he called, not because he came back, but because she did. And if you asked her now, she'd say this: the moment I stopped chasing him wasn't the end of our story, it was the beginning of mine. In relationships, especially those that have begun to fray or shift into emotional unavailability, the urge to fix, chase, or clarify is powerful. But when a man pulls away or becomes detached, continuing to pursue, even with good intentions, often deepens the distance. The art of ignoring, when done with emotional intelligence, is not about silence as punishment, but silence as self-respect. It's not about turning away in contempt, but turning inward for clarity, for peace, for emotional recalibration. Here are a few tools grounded in both clinical insight and lived experience that can help you shift from emotional exhaustion to centered power. When you feel emotionally triggered, whether it's after he leaves a message unread, replies with one-word text, or gives you the silent treatment, your body enters a state of emotional flooding. Research from our lab shows that when heart rate exceeds 100 beats per minute in conflict, your ability to process language, empathize, or access logic drops dramatically. In other words, when you're flooded, you're not communicating, you're surviving. Here's the tool. Before you respond, pause for 60 seconds, just 1 minute. Place a hand on your chest or stomach and name the sensations you feel: heat, tightness, rapid breath. Then name the emotion. This is sadness. This is rejection. This is fear. That small act of emotional labeling, what we call name it to tame it, signals the brain's prefrontal cortex to re-engage. You become the narrator, not just the experiencer. That pause can save you from overexpositioning, over-texting, or saying something that costs your dignity. Try this tonight. Write to release, not to send. We often draft text in our minds, sometimes in notes apps, sometimes in actual messages we never hit send on, trying to get just the right words to make someone see us, hear us, respond to us. Tonight, instead of texting him, write to yourself. Open a journal or even a private voice note and answer this prompt. What did I give today that I didn't receive in return? And this may include attention, affection, presence, softness, energy. The purpose here isn't to tally emotional debt. It's to gently call yourself back to reality, to notice where you are overgiving and undervaluing your own needs. The simple act of writing gives shape to feelings that often swirl into anxiety. It helps you grieve expectations without reaching for someone who isn't reaching back. In our research with couples over decades, we found that stable relationships maintain a 5-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. But when you're dealing with detachment or ambiguity, you often experience far more emotional triggers than affirmations, especially when you're still emotionally engaged and hoping for connection. You can't control his ratio, but you can control your internal one. Every time you feel a trigger, for example, he doesn't reply or he dismisses something important to you, follow that moment with 3 self-motivating statements. You don't have to believe them fully at first, but speak them anyway. Something like, I'm allowed to want emotional reciprocity. I'm not too much, I'm just unmet. What I feel matters even if he doesn't acknowledge it. These statements are the emotional equivalent of rewiring your internal landscape. You're repairing the relationship with yourself, Over time, this reconditioning helps you shift from reaction to reflection. A sacred boundary, silent Sundays. Choose one day each week where you intentionally practice silence, not as punishment, but as grounding. Turn your phone to do not disturb. No checking messages, no refreshing to see if he's watched your story. Instead, engage in nervous system repair. Read something nourishing. Walk slowly. Drink something warm without multitasking. This ritual becomes a sacred space where your worth isn't determined by a ping or a reply. It's a reset, a space where you stop chasing closure from someone else and begin offering it to yourself. You are not the fixer of every rupture. You are not the emotional first responder to someone who won't communicate. Ignoring, when rooted in wisdom, becomes a return to dignity. Not a withdrawal of love, but a reclaiming of self-respect. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix. I'm talking about emotional fatigue, the kind that comes from giving, explaining, waiting, from holding conversations in your head that he won't have in real life, from rereading messages, looking for signs, overthinking the tone in his last okay. You've been spinning your heart in circles, trying to make sense of the distance, trying to be understood, trying to be enough. And I want to say something to you directly, gently, and truthfully. You are not crazy. You are not needy. You are not too much. You are responding to a pattern, emotional disconnection, that our research shows is one of the most painful dynamics in intimate relationships. And when you're met with silence, dismissal, or emotional shutdown, your brain does exactly what it's wired to do. Seek repair. You reach out. You explain more. You try harder. Because somewhere deep inside, you believe that if you can just say it the right way, show him how much you care, he'll come back emotionally. He'll see you again. But what if I told you the healing doesn't come from trying harder? What if the real transformation starts when you stop trying to be chosen and instead start choosing yourself? Let's be honest, chasing someone's attention, approval, or presence is humiliating. Not because you're weak, but because it places your sense of worth in someone else's ability to respond. And if that person is avoidant, emotionally unavailable, or unready, your efforts only echo louder in the silence. So here's your mirror truth. What if you weren't too much, just unprotected? What if all that explaining was your nervous system begging for safety? What if all that fixing was you trying to earn the bare minimum? Eye contact, engagement, accountability. This is where detachment becomes medicine. Not coldness, not punishment, but a boundary between your soul and the void he leaves when he shuts down. Silence is not always abandonment. Sometimes it's a return to self-respect, to stillness, to your own voice, which has been whispering beneath the noise all along. And maybe that whisper sounds like this: I deserve a love that listens. That's your goosebump moment. Let it land. Because you've spent enough time trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't hold it. You fought to be heard in a room where your heart was speaking a language he refused to learn. Now you pause. Oh, you breathe. Now you walk away, not from him, but toward you. There's your transformation statement to carry forward. My silence is not empty. It's full of everything I stopped giving away for free. When you detach with dignity, you don't become cold. You become clear. And in that clarity, something beautiful happens. You stop needing to be seen because you finally started seeing yourself. We began with a contradiction, that love means leaning in, proving, explaining, that silence is distance and detachment is cold. But now maybe you see the truth more clearly. Sometimes silence isn't the absence of love, it's the beginning of self-respect. Sometimes ignoring isn't rejection, it's protection. The emotional wound you've been carrying wasn't just about him not hearing you. It was about you losing the sound of your own voice in the noise of trying to matter, trying to be enough. But trying isn't love. And peace doesn't come from getting a reply. It comes from no longer needing one. So when you choose stillness, when you pull back, not from bitterness, but from wisdom, you're not abandoning anyone. You're finally returning to yourself. And maybe that's the shift. You're no longer the woman chasing clarity. You become the woman who holds it. Stillness isn't silence. It's where your clarity lives now.